The Vikings are considered in history some of the most brutal and barbaric conquerors of lands, and they were also some of the most effective. Scare tactics and raids upon civilized and peaceful people would lead to huge propaganda stories of the Vikings and Norsemen, and they would also become greatly known by their enemies. Everyone feared them, but in England for centuries they would have or try to establish a presence, and Viking rulers would rule part of the country. But during one siege of a city, the Saxons who were defending would use one of the most horrific and brutal methods to repel the Vikings, and this has gone down in history as a savage way of fending off the most evil of attackers. Join us today as we look at the most horrific way of defending a city from the Vikings, and as always, to support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. During the siege of Chester during 907, the Anglo-Saxon inhabitants of the city managed to defeat a Viking siege. The city before had been attacked many times in the centuries earlier, but an 11th century chronicle records how the Vikings from Denmark and Norway attacked the city, and how Saxons led by Lord Ethelred and Lady Ethelflaed would repel them. When the Vikings focused on besieging Chester, those living in the city would send word to their king and queen about the attacks, and they advised them to use a tactic which would become infamous in history, the feigned retreat. This is where a defending army would pretend they were retreating or even running away, before they then turned back and slaughtered their attackers, taking them by surprise. It was said of this initial attack that, when the troops who were in the city saw, from the city wall, the many hosts of the Danes and Norwegians coming to attack them, they sent messengers to the king of the Saxons, who was sick and on the verge of death at the time, to ask his advice and the advice of the queen. What he advised was that they do battle outside near the city, with the gate of the city open, that they choose a troop of horsemen to be concealed on the inside, and those of the people of the city who would be strongest in battle would flee back into the city as if defeated, and when the most of the army of Norwegians had come through the gate of the city, the troop that was in hiding beyond should close the gate after that horde, and without pretending any more they should attack the throng that had come into the city and kill them all. Despite the tactic being used well and being effective, the Viking attacks kept coming, and they were sustained over a period of time. But Ethelred and Ethelflaed had other ideas. They then told the Irish to butter up the Vikings, and pretend to want to sign a peace treaty with them. They said regarding this that, if they will make terms for that, bring them to swear an oath in a place where it would be convenient to kill them, and when they are taking an oath on their swords and their shields, as is their custom, they will put aside all their good shooting weapons. It was hoped that if they did this they would be weaker, and the Vikings did fall for this, and they laid down their weapons and their shields to take their oaths of peace. But during this the inhabitants and people of Chester would slaughter them. They hurled rocks on their enemies and rammed beams into them, leading to a huge amount of bloodshed. However, there were more brutal and barbaric methods used to try and repel the Vikings in the months to come. But the surprise attack, albeit effective, would require more serious action. The Vikings did not abandon Chester, and they were experienced and battle-hardened, but they were also ruthless, and they believed that they would shatter any further inhabitants who attacked them. They said that any hurdle brought in front of them, they would break down. They planned to undermine the walls of the city, to bring them down and then storm into the city. But the people of Chester then resorted to the most brutal methods to keep them out. It was said that, however, the other army, the Norwegians, was under the hurdles, making a hole in the wall. What the Saxons and the Irish, who were among them, did was to hurl down huge boulders, so that they crushed the hurdles on their heads. What they did to prevent that was to put great columns under the hurdles. What the Saxons did was to put the ale and water they found in the town into the town's cauldrons, and to boil it, and throw it over the people who were under the hurdles, so that their skin peeled off them. The Norwegians' response to this was to spread hides on top of the hurdles. The Saxons then scattered all the beehives that were in the town on top of the besiegers, which prevented them from moving their feet and hands because of all the numbers of bees stinging them, and that they gave the city up and left it. So what had finally defeated the Vikings was brutal and was shocking. The Saxons had poured boiling ale and water onto them, which was thrown on top of those who were trying to undermine the walls. This then caused a horrific suffering, in which many of the Vikings were scalded and were even burned to death. But to make things worse, they then scattered all of the beehives which were found in the town on top of the besieging army, and this prevented them from moving, as the bees were causing chaos, stinging, and causing a huge amount of pain. After this, the Vikings did leave. What this shows us is the lengths that people went to try and repel the Danes, as they were known at the time, because there was a huge amount of fear. But despite their reputation, boiling water and beer, and also beehives, were effective against the Vikings. It's a pity those monks on Lindisfarne centuries before did not have any beehives. But the idea of throwing boiling liquid through to an enemy would be used in the centuries after in murder holes inside of castles' gatehouses. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.